You're listening to the FAI INKWELL. This podcast is produced by Frontier Alliance International, making our weekly published articles available in audio format. Explore all citations and footnotes in the original document and get more information about FAI at fai.online. Thanks for listening.
I'm Stephanie Quick, and this is the FAI INKWELL. This week's article is titled The More Important Part of Your Life. And before I begin to read it, I want to give a couple of reminders. The first is that this article in its written form with all of its footnotes and citations is available at fai.online. You can browse through all of our archives at fai.online/articles. This article in particular has 27 footnotes, which for me is a bit light. But everything is available on our website and in the free FAI app. The second thing I'd like to remind you about is our $5 monthly giving campaign. We say you can skip a coffee and change the Middle East. We are committed as an organization, as Frontier Alliance International, to resourcing those who have the gospel for free and reaching those who don't have the gospel for free. So we don't want any kind of paywall between any of our initiatives, any of our ministry. And if you appreciate what we're doing and you're able, we invite you to join our $5 monthly giving campaign that helps fund our work in the Muslim world across the Middle East in 1040 window. And you can join that campaign as well at fai.online. So without further ado, this week's article, The More Important Part of Your Life. A refrain from a Ben Abraham song keeps cycling through my mind every few days. He says, "Time waits for no man." Or the Johnny Swim lyric, "Time is the worst kind of friend, always there when you need it, then gone in the end." And then Solomon whispers from gold-gilt pages, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in our hearts, except that no man can find out the work that God does from beginning to end." I appreciate that God can redeem everything for beauty, let alone that he committed to do so. Verses like Romans 8:28 and Genesis 50:20, that the Lord turns everything for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose, or things that were meant for evil he has redeemed for good. These verses give me no small amount of courage, and I'm grateful for his kindness to plant eternity in our hearts, even though I don't really understand what that means. I also don't really get that Isaiah says he inhabits eternity himself. But I have to chuckle that the wisest man ever, second to Jesus, has to then conclude, but we don't really have capacity to wrap our little minds around what he's doing. Jesus himself, in his last conversation before his ascension, affirmed our inability to access time-related information under our Father's jurisdiction. Paul did receive revelation about the eternal purposes of God that is quite the big picture. In Ephesians 3, he says, "This intent that now the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church, by the ecclesia, by the one new man, to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places, according to the eternal purpose which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord, in whom we have boldness and access with confidence through faith in him." I hit a birthday this year that put me squarely on the friendly side of 40. This means nearly 3 decades have passed since I said the prayer, and 2 decades since I solidly reckoned with what Bonhoeffer would call the cost of discipleship. Every decision I have made in these years has been informed by a driving sense of urgency and a gamble on the ethics of Golgotha. I've often asked myself, what am I going to wish I did when I'm looking back on this from my 50th birthday? Or, more soberly, what am I going to wish I did when I'm 80 and it's too late to change anything? What story do I want to be held accountable for when the Son of Man judges the quick and the dead? How do I, using the words of Paul in his letter to the Colossians, walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, fruitful in every good work, with ever-increasing knowledge of God and his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding? Evidently, we must begin with the knowledge of God, or as A.W. Tozer put it, the knowledge of the holy. Now, we live in a world of war and escalating controversies and collisions and betrayals and generally bad news everywhere we look. In general, I think we are barreling towards the day of the Lord, and that will ultimately be the best thing that could ever happen to us, though it'll get a bit gnarly here in the meantime. I'm spending the summer with hoses locked and loaded on standby for any time Hezbollah tries to burn down my house in Golani Village. We are, presently, 2-0, meaning we've had 2 close calls, and we've put the fire out both times, thank God. Just as an aside, I'd like to say you can check out our work in Israel, on our YouTube channel and the FAI app, and swim down that rabbit hole and find different ways that you can partner with our work here. But it is easy, maybe I'm speaking for myself, it's easy to get obsessed with the big picture and bogged down in the bad news. It can be harder to find the joy and fun in the smaller details. But then Jesus goes and says something like, I have come that ye may have life and life abundant. He himself didn't quite seem like that abundance is relegated only to the ages to come. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John make it clear that Jesus was pretty present with the people around him. And I've really appreciated John Eldredge's book, Beautiful Outlaw. It's a wonderful meditation on this, and I reread it almost annually. I don't adhere to a prosperity gospel that promises your best life now if you just say yes to Jesus. Jesus is not a vending machine or a cotton candy stick at a carnival hyping you up on some sort of sugar trip, setting you up for a hard crash afterwards. To be sure, the hope that is the anchor of our souls is forged in us through an assembly line of trouble, persevering through said trouble, thus producing character conformed into the image of the crucified one that ultimately, somehow, anchors us in the steadfast trust in what he has promised through the gospel of the kingdom. Yet, you are alive right now, and what you believe about Jesus as you go through this process right now is, as Tozer theorized, the most important thing about you. He explains, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. The history of mankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion, and man's spiritual history will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. Worship is pure or base as the worshiper entertains high or low thoughts of God. For this reason, the gravest question before the church is always God himself, and the most portentous fact about any man is not what he at a given time may say or do, but what he deep in his heart conceives God to be like. We tend, by a secret law of the soul, to move toward our mental image of God. This thesis that what my mind entertains and calls God when I think about God is the most critically indicative element of my life. This thesis had a tremendous impact on my life as I first read it for leisure in my final semester of university. It implies sober consequences in such a way that I was pressed into the scriptures for clarity and ultimately found the beauty of God's very real good news of the kingdom soon to be restored. This is the journey that ultimately gave me clarity on the Jerusalem centricity of the scriptures, and I now firmly believe that if we miss Jerusalem, we will miss Jesus. We will miss Jesus if we miss Jerusalem. It pressed me into the big picture. Yet, perhaps the fundamental premise of Tozer's thesis is simply this: thinking about God. Henry Nouwen, an advocate for listening to what he called the voice of love, rather than the voice of accusation or the voice of self that often agrees with accusation, asserted the spiritual practice of discernment and discerning both the knowledge of God and his will for your life, especially in order to obey it, is simply finding God in the mundane moments of life. Nouwen says it this way: discernment is a spiritual understanding and an experiential knowledge of how God is active in daily life that is acquired through disciplined spiritual practice. Discernment is faithful living and listening to God's love and direction so that we can fulfill our individual calling and shared mission. for all the swirling circumstances of your life, for all the quagmire of global politics, for all the tumult of what Solomon calls in the Proverbs hopes deferred, and the daily wrestle of what Jesus calls the cares of this life. The most important thing about your life and mine is that we right now, today, remember we have a good Father in a good heaven whose good pleasure is to give us a good kingdom. And he will give you glimpses of that goodness here and now in this age. As an aged David put it, he said, I once was young and now I am old, but I have never seen the righteous forsaken. So look up. You have a Father in heaven smiling over you. The Olympian Eric Liddell famously said, when I run, I feel his pleasure. Find whatever it is, however your Creator has wired you, that you feel his smile over your life. I, probably for obvious reasons, if you know anything about me, especially enjoyed Corey Asbury's decision to get the dog instead of the big ministry platform. He shared this on a recent interview with Rita Springer on her podcast. And if you listen closely, you can probably hear my dog sleeping and snoring behind me. Jesus said to seek first the kingdom, and all the secondary stuff falls into place. All the big picture macros. He knows the best answers to all the anxiety-laden questions keeping you up at night. He will meet you in the mundane, in all the moments reflected upon in Dante Bowe's Voice of God song that I often listen to when I need a reminder to calm down and lighten up. It is by adopting Brother Lawrence's language, practicing the presence of God day to day, that will give you courage to face the larger issues. And frankly, you are who you hang out with. So connecting with Jesus every day won't just make you more like him, it'll also make you less unlike him, meaning he is less cranky and more fun to be around than we tend to be. Friendship with Jesus is the best and most magnificent use of your very limited time in your numbered days of this present evil age. The most important thing in your life isn't learning all the Bible trivia to pass a test, or certainly not to win an argument on social media. It's that you have an abiding friendship with the Word himself, who took on flesh so that he could dwell amongst us. Call it simple devotion, call it friendship. He calls it abiding. So abide in the vine that wants to give you life today and forevermore. In his own words, he wants to be with you. He wants you with him where he is. Maranatha.
Thank you for listening to the FAI Inkwell. This podcast is part of our commitment to resource those who have the gospel as we prioritize reaching those who do not have the gospel. For more information about our ministry and pioneering initiatives among the unreached and unengaged, download the FAI app or visit us at fai.online. Maranatha.